Stop everything you are doing right now, because I promise you that what you are about to watch is going to completely change the way you look at 10-cent coins forever. I am not exaggerating when I tell you that some of the coins we are covering in today's video have sold at major international auctions for figures that would make a property investor jealous. These are not rare gold sovereigns or ancient Roman coins. These are Australian 10-cent pieces that people have literally thrown into tip jars, donation boxes, and couch cushions without a second thought. Today, we are counting down 10 specific dates in the Australian 10-cent series that are hiding extraordinary value, and by the end of this video, you are going to want to sprint to your coin jar and start checking every single one. Stay locked in, because number one on this list today is the kind of discovery that changes people's lives, and I am building up to it right now. Let's get straight into it. First up, coin number 10, the 1985 Australian 10-cent coin Allright. Kicking off our countdown at number 10, we have the 1985 Australian 10-cent coin, and I know what you are thinking. You are thinking this is a mid-80s decimal coin, and how exciting can it possibly be? But I need you to shelve that assumption immediately, because the 1985 10-cent has a collector's story behind it that most Australians have absolutely no idea about. Let me paint the full picture for you, starting from the very beginning. The 1985 10-cent was produced at the Royal Australian Mint, located in Canberra, the same facility that has been striking Australia's decimal coinage since the country made the switch from pounds, shillings, and pence back in February 1966. The Mint in Canberra is one of the most respected coin-producing facilities in the entire world, known for extraordinarily high technical standards and meticulous quality control. And the coins that came out of this mint during the 1980s carry that legacy with them. On the reverse of the 1985 10-cent, you have the design that has become one of the most beloved and recognizable coin designs in Australian numismatic history. The Eastern spine beak, rendered in breathtaking detail by the legendary British-born Australian designer Stuart Devlin. Devlin was commissioned to design the reverses of all 6 original Australian decimal coins back in the 1960s. And his work on this series is considered some of the finest coin artistry produced anywhere in the world during that era. The spine beak on the 10-cent shows the bird in profile with its extraordinarily long curved bill that it uses to extract nectar from native flowers. And the level of feather detail that Devlin captured in this design is simply remarkable when you look at it under magnification. Every individual feather appears to have been handcrafted with surgical precision, and the way the bird sits against the smooth background field of the coin creates a visual contrast that is stunning in high-grade examples. On the obverse of the 1985 10-cent, you have the Arnold Machen portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, the same effigy that appeared on Australian coins throughout much of this period. And Machen's portrait is itself considered a masterpiece of medallic sculpture, capturing the Queen in a dignified and timeless profile that suits the coin's overall aesthetic perfectly. Now, the face value of this coin is 10 cents, and in heavily worn circulated condition, that is roughly what it is worth to the average person. But this is where the story gets genuinely fascinating and where I need you to really pay attention. The 1985 10-cent coin is notoriously difficult to find in truly high mint state condition, and the reason for this comes down to something called bag marks. When coins are freshly struck at the mint, they get tumbled together in large canvas bags before being distributed, and this process causes small contact marks and abrasions on the coin surfaces that permanently reduce their grade. For a coin like the 1985 10-cent with its large open field areas and detailed raised design, even minor bag marks are highly visible and dramatically impact the grade and therefore the value. Finding a 1985 10-cent that survived this process without significant marks is genuinely uncommon, which is precisely why high-grade examples command the prices they do. In circulated grades ranging from fine through to extremely fine, you are looking at values between $1 and $15, which is already above face value, but nothing to get too excited about. Moving into the lower mint state grades of MS60 through MS62, you start seeing prices in the range of $40 to $150. For a problem-free example, in MS63, the price moves into the $200 to $400 range as the coin becomes noticeably nicer and the competition among collectors increases. But here is where things really accelerate. A 1985 10-cent graded MS-65 by one of the major third-party grading services like PCGS or NGC has achieved auction results ranging between $1,000 and $2,500 Australian, with some exceptional examples pushing even higher depending on eye appeal and strike quality. In MS-66, the population of certified coins drops significantly, and prices have been recorded at auction between $2,500 and $4,500. If you happen to encounter a 1985 10-cent in MS-67, which is extraordinarily rare for this date, you are potentially looking at a coin worth between $6,000 and $10,000 or more. And serious registry set collectors would compete aggressively for such an example. The proof version of the 1985 10-cent from the annual proof set is an entirely different beast altogether. These coins were struck multiple times on specially prepared polished planches using specially prepared dies, resulting in mirror-like background fields and frosted raised devices that create a stunning cameo contrast effect. A 1985 proof 10-cent in PF68 Ultra Cameo condition is worth between $1,500 and $3,000. And in PF69 Ultra Cameo the value climbs to between $3,000 and $6,000. A perfect PF70 example, if one exists in a certified holder, would be worth significantly more and would attract attention from the most serious collectors in the country. If you have a 1985 10-cent sitting undisturbed in an original mint set, please do not open that set with bare hands, put on cotton gloves, keep it away from humidity and direct sunlight. And seriously consider having the coin professionally graded, because you might be holding something far more valuable than you realize. Next up, coin number 9. The 1981 Australian 10-cent coin. Moving up to number 9 on our countdown, we have the 1981 Australian 10-cent coin, and this is a date that I genuinely love talking about because it occupies this fascinating position in the Australian decimal coin series where collectors often underestimate it initially, but then become absolutely obsessed with it once they understand the full story. The year 1981 was an interesting one for Australian coinage generally. The Royal Australian Mint was well into its stride producing decimal coins for everyday circulation, and the manufacturing processes had been refined considerably since those early years of decimal coinage in the late 1960s. But refinement in the production process does not automatically mean every coin that came off the press in 1981 was perfect. And the variation in quality that exists across the surviving population of 1981 10-cent coins is what makes this date so compelling from a collector's perspective. Starting with the design itself, the 1981 10-cent carries Stuart Devlin's iconic Eastern spine beak on the reverse. And coins struck during the early to mid-1980s are often praised by specialists for having particularly sharp and well-defined strikes compared to some other periods in the series. The detail on the spine beak's plumage, the texture of the bird's breast feathers, the precise curvature of that distinctive long bill, all of these elements come through with exceptional clarity on well-struck 1981 examples. And under a quality loupe, the design is genuinely beautiful in a way that photographs rarely do full justice to. The obverse carries the Arnold Machen effigy of Queen Elizabeth II, which was standard for Australian coins of this period, and the portrait on 1981 examples is generally considered to be well executed with good definition in the hair and facial features on above-average strikes. Now let us get into the values because this is what you came here for, and I am not going to disappoint you. In heavily circulated condition, a 1981 10-cent is worth between 50 cents and $3. Common enough that most dealers are not particularly excited to see them in that state. In very fine to extremely fine circulated condition, you are looking at values between $5 and $25, depending on the specific quality of the example. Once you cross into uncirculated territory, the market changes completely. A 1981 10-cent in MS63 condition, meaning it has full mint luster with only minor contact marks visible under magnification, trades for between $150 and $350 among serious collectors. In MS64, the price moves into the $400 to $700 range, and in MS65, you are firmly into four-figure territory, with auction results documented between $1,200 and $2,000 Australian. The MS66 population for the 1981 10-cent is extremely thin, and examples graded at this level have achieved prices between $2,500 and $5,000 at major numismatic auctions in Australia. Now here is something that really gets collectors excited about the 1981 10 cent. And that is the existence of documented error coins and varieties from this year. There are known examples of 1981 10 cents with die crack varieties, where stress fractures in the coin die have left raised lines across the coin's surface, creating visually distinctive pieces that are immediately identifiable and highly collectible. Minor misalignment errors also exist in the 1981 series, where the obverse and reverse designs are not perfectly centered relative to each other, and depending on the degree of misalignment, these errors can add substantial premiums to the coin's value. A significant die crack variety in MS64 or above has achieved auction results between $3,000 and $7,000. And a major misalignment error in high grade from this year has the potential to sell for between $5,000 and $12,000 depending on the severity of the error and the enthusiasm of competing bidders at auction. The Proof 1981 10 cent from the annual Proof set is consistently sought after by collectors building complete proof date runs of the decimal series, and in PF68, Ultra Cameo condition values sit between $1,200 and $2,500. Climbing to between $2,500 and $5,000 in PF69 Ultra Cameo. This is a date that rewards careful searching and proper grading, and if you have any 1981 10 cents put aside in original packaging, they deserve your full attention. Next up, coin number 8. The 1984 Australian 10 cent coin number 8 on our list today is the 1984 Australian 10 cent coin, and I want to give this one the deep and thorough treatment it deserves because 1984 is genuinely one of the more nuanced and interesting dates in the entire Australian decimal 10 cent series when you start digging into the details. By 1984, the Royal Australian Mint had been producing decimal coinage for 18 years, and the institutional knowledge and technical capability within the Mint was at a very high level. The equipment being used, the alloy compositions, the die preparation processes, all of these elements had been continuously refined since 1966. And the coins being produced in the mid-1980s reflect this accumulated expertise. The 1984 10 cent continues with Stuart Devlin's Eastern Spinebeak design, a design that by this point had been gracing Australian 10 cent coins for nearly 2 decades, but had in no way lost its visual power or artistic merit. What is particularly interesting about the 1984 10 cent from a technical standpoint is the die quality variations that exist across the year's production. Some 1984 10 cents were struck from fresh, sharply cut dies that produce coins with exceptional definition and strong relief, while others were struck from more worn dies later in their production life, resulting in slightly softer details, especially in the fine feather work of the Spinebeak's plumage. To the untrained eye, these differences might seem minor, but to an experienced collector examining coins under magnification, the difference between a coin struck from a fresh die and one struck from a tired die is immediately apparent and has a direct impact on both grade and value. A 1984 10 cent struck from fresh dies with full sharp definition in all design elements, original mint luster completely intact, and minimal contact marks is a genuinely beautiful object, and it commands a premium over even technically similar coins that lack that sharp strike quality. In circulated grades, the 1984 10 cent trades for between $1 and $10 depending on where, nothing remarkable in that territory. In the lower mint state grades of MS60 through MS62, you are looking at values between $30 and $100 for clean problem-free examples. MS63 brings you into the $150 to $300 range, and MS64 moves up to between $350 and $650. In MS65, the 1984 10 cent has achieved auction results between $900 and $1,800. And MS66 examples have sold for between $2,000 and $4,000 at major sales. The Proof 1984 10 cent is particularly admired by collectors for the quality of the cameo contrast on well-preserved examples, with the frosted Spinebeak design standing out dramatically against the deeply mirrored fields. In PF67, Ultra Cameo condition values sit between $800 and $1,600, rising to between $1,800 and $3,500 in PF68 Ultra Cameo. A PF69 Ultra Cameo 1984 10 cent is a seriously desirable coin worth between $3,500 and $7,000 to the right collector. Error coins from the 1984 date also exist and deserve mention, with documented cases of broad-struck examples where the collar die was not properly engaged during striking, resulting in a coin that is slightly wider and thinner than normal, with a less defined edge. A broad-struck 1984 10-cent in high mint state has sold for between $2,500 and $6,000, depending on the degree of the error, the overall technical quality, and the enthusiasm of the collector market at the time of the sale. Next up, coin number 7. The 1983 Australian 10-cent coin coming in strong at number 7 is the 1983 Australian 10-cent coin, and this is a date that I think is criminally underappreciated by casual collectors who have not done their research. Because once you understand what makes the 1983 10-cent special, you will never look at it the same way again. The year 1983 was a significant one in Australian history more broadly, and the coinage produced that year carries with it a certain historical weight that adds an intangible appeal for collectors who appreciate their coins in their full historical context. The 1983 10-cent was produced at the Royal Australian Mint and features the same Devlin spinebeak reverse and Machin obverse portrait that define this period of Australian decimal coinage. But what sets the 1983 apart for collectors is a combination of factors relating to mintage, the difficulty of finding high-grade examples, and the presence of some genuinely exciting varieties that have been documented and cataloged by specialist researchers. One of the things that makes the 1983 10-cent particularly challenging to find in high grade is the susceptibility of this date's coins to what numismatists call carbon spotting, a form of surface contamination that appears as small dark spots on the coin's surface and which permanently damages the grade and eye appeal of affected examples. Carbon spots can develop on coins that were exposed to certain atmospheric conditions or stored in suboptimal environments, and the 1983 10-cent seems to be particularly vulnerable to this issue compared to some surrounding dates, which means truly spot-free high-grade examples are genuinely scarce and command significant premiums when they appear at auction. In circulated grades, the 1983 10-cent is worth between $1 and $12. Relatively modest but already above face value for better circulated pieces. In MS63 condition clean spot-free examples fetch between $200 and $400, and in MS64 you are looking at values between $450 and $800. MS65 examples of the 1983 10-cent have achieved auction results ranging from $1,300 to $2,300, and MS66 pieces have sold for between $2,500 and $5,000. The variety situation with the 1983 10-cent is where things become genuinely extraordinary for serious collectors. There are documented repunched date varieties for the 1983 10-cent where examination under magnification reveals evidence of the date having been entered into the die more than once, leaving ghost images of the digits that are visible as doubling or tripling of certain numerals. A repunched date variety 1983 10-cent in MS64 condition has the potential to sell for between $4,000 and $9,000. And in MS65, you could be looking at values between $8,000 and $15,000 for a well-documented and certified example. This is the kind of variety that serious collectors will travel interstate to acquire, and if you happen to find a 1983 10-cent and notice anything unusual about the date digits under magnification, please have it examined by a specialist immediately before doing anything else with it. The proof 1983 10-cent in PF69 Ultra Cameo condition is worth between $3,000 and $6,000. And the hunt for perfect PF70 examples keeps specialist collectors up at night because the population of coins at that level is extraordinarily small. Next up, coin number 6. The 1982 Australian 10-cent coin. Halfway through our countdown, at number 6 we have the 1982 Australian 10-cent coin, and I have to say that the 1982 is one of my personal favorites in this entire series for reasons that go well beyond pure collectability. There is something about the coins produced in the very early 1980s in Australia that feels particularly significant from a historical standpoint, and the 1982 10-cent sits right at the heart of that era with a combination of characteristics that make it endlessly fascinating to study and collect. The Royal Australian Mint's production of the 1982 10-cent occurred during a period when the Mint was also producing coins for other nations under contract. which meant that the facility was operating at high capacity and the demands on equipment, dies, and staff were considerable. This context is important because it helps explain why there is meaningful variation in the quality of coins produced during this period, and why finding genuinely exceptional examples of the 1982 10-cent requires patience and a discerning eye. Stuart Devlin's spinebeak design on the reverse of the 1982 10-cent is, on the best-struck examples from this year, absolutely magnificent. The fine detail work in the bird's feathers, the crisp definition of the bill, the clean separation between the raised design elements and the background field, these qualities combine on the finest known examples to create a coin that is genuinely breathtaking under good lighting and proper magnification. The mocking obverse portrait on 1982 examples is also generally well executed, with strong definition in the hair strands and facial features on above-average strikes. Starting with the value picture in circulated grades, a 1982 10-cent in fine to very fine condition is worth between $2 and $15. Moving into the upper circulated grades of extremely fine and about uncirculated, you start seeing values between $20 and $60 for the nicer pieces. In MS-63, the 1982 10-cent trades for between $180 and $350, and in MS-64, the range moves to between $400 and $750. MS-65 is where the 1982 really starts to shine in terms of auction results, with documented sales between $1,500 and $2,800 for certified examples at this grade level. MS-66 pieces are significantly rarer and have achieved prices between $3,000 and $6,000 at major Australian numismatic auctions. The error coin landscape for the 1982 10-cent is particularly rich and worth spending time on. There are documented examples of 1982 10-cents with significant die cuts, which occur when a piece of the die actually breaks away during the striking process, leaving an area of the coin with no design detail and a raised blob of metal where the die fragment was missing. A die cut error on a 1982 10-cent in MS-63 or above is a seriously important numismatic rarity and has sold for between $5,000 and $12,000 at specialist auctions, with the most dramatic examples of this error type potentially commanding even higher prices depending on the size and location of the cud. Proof 1982 10-cents in PF68 Ultra Cameo condition are valued at between $1,500 and $3,000, rising to between $3,000 and $6,500 in PF69 Ultra Cameo. This is absolutely a coin that deserves careful examination whenever you encounter it. Next up, coin number 5. The 1976 Australian 10-cent coin. We are now in the top 5 of our countdown, and the excitement is genuinely building. Because from this point on, we are talking about coins whose values and stories move into territory that most people would find absolutely staggering. At number 5, we have the 1976 Australian 10-cent coin. And the 1970s decade as a whole produced some of the most collectible and valuable Australian decimal 10-cent coins that exist, with 1976 being a particularly important date that commands serious respect among specialists. The 1970s were a complex period for Australian coinage. The decimal system was now a decade old and firmly established, but the economic conditions of the 1970s, including inflation, changing industrial patterns, and evolving mint priorities, meant that the coinage of this decade has some genuinely unusual characteristics when examined carefully. The 1976 10-cent was produced at the Royal Australian Mint, and the mintage figures for this year, when examined against the population of high-grade surviving examples available today, tell a story of significant attrition through circulation and improper storage that has made truly premium quality examples genuinely scarce and desirable. Devlin's spinebeak on the 1976 10-cent, when encountered on a high-grade example, demonstrates beautifully how this design rewards quality. The bird's feathers catch the light differently depending on the angle of view, creating a subtle but beautiful visual effect that is particularly pronounced on coins with original undisturbed mint luster. The luster on 1976 10-cents has a distinctive quality that experienced collectors describe as having a particularly attractive cartwheel effect when the coin is rotated under a single light source, and this quality is highly prized and actively sought. In circulated grades, the 1976 10-cent is worth between $3 and $30 for nicer examples, already well above face value for coins in excellent circulated condition. Moving into uncirculated territory, MS-63 examples command between $250 and $500, while MS-64 pieces trade for between $600 and $1,200. MS-65 is where the 1976 10-cent really asserts itself as a serious collector coin, with auction results documented between $2,000 and $3,500 for certified examples. MS-66 pieces are genuinely rare and have achieved prices between $4,000 and $8,000 at major sales. The variety situation for the 1976 is extraordinarily exciting and is one of the main reasons this date sits at number 5 on our list. There are documented double die varieties for the 1976 10-cent where significant doubling is visible in the date and legend elements when examined under magnification, and these varieties are among the most sought after in the entire Australian decimal coin series. A double die variety 1976 10-cent in MS-64 condition has the capacity to sell for between $8,000 and $18,000 at a well-attended specialist auction. And in MS-65, you could potentially be looking at values between $15,000 and $30,000 for a perfectly documented and certified example of one of the more dramatic double die varieties. These are not theoretical numbers. These reflect the genuine enthusiasm and competitive bidding that top-quality Australian decimal varieties generate in today's collector market. The Proof 1976 10-cent, where it exists in original proof set packaging in perfect condition, is worth between $2,000 and $4,000 in PF68 Ultra Cameo, and exceptional PF69 examples have sold for between $4,000 and $8,000. Next up, coin number 4, the 1968 Australian 10-cent coin. At number 4 on our countdown, we have the 1968 Australian 10-cent coin, and we are now moving into territory where the coins we are discussing are genuinely historically significant early pieces in the Australian decimal coinage story. The 1968 10-cent was produced just 2 years after the introduction of decimal currency in Australia, at a time when the entire country was still adjusting to the new monetary system, and the Royal Australian Mint was working at extraordinary pace to produce sufficient coinage for a nation that was simultaneously retiring its old currency and adopting an entirely new one. The early decimal years, roughly 1966 through to the early 1970s, produced coins with a combination of historical significance, relative scarcity and high grade, and strong collector demand that pushes values to levels that genuinely surprise people who are not familiar with the market. The 1968 10-cent in particular benefits from the fact that coins from this year were put into heavy circulation immediately upon production, meaning the vast majority of 1968 10-cents that still exist today are in well-worn circulated condition. Finding examples that escaped the circulation process and survived in high mint state is a genuine challenge that even experienced and well-connected collectors sometimes struggle with. Stuart Devlin's spinebeak design on early decimal coins like the 1968 has a slightly different character compared to coins from the 1980s, reflecting the early period of the dies and the particular planchy preparation and striking characteristics of the late 1960s production. On the finest known examples from 1968, the design has a freshness and vitality that is captivating, and the original mint luster on unsearched examples has a beautiful warm tone that reflects the coin's age and undisturbed condition. In circulated grades, the 1968 10-cent ranges from $5 in lower worn grades up to $100 for choice extremely fine examples, already reflecting the age premium and collector demand for this early date. In MS-63 condition, a 1968 10-cent commands between $500 and $900, and MS-64 examples have traded for between $1,000 and $2,000. MS-65 pieces are genuinely scarce, and auction results for certified MS-65 examples range between $3,000 and $6,000. A figure that reflects just how difficult it is to find this early date in truly pristine condition. MS-66 is an extraordinary rarity for the 1968, and documented auction results at this grade level have achieved between $7,000 and $15,000, with the top known examples representing genuine numismatic treasures of the Australian decimal series. Error coins from 1968 carry enormous premiums due to their combination of early date status and error rarity. And a significant mint error from this year in any grade above MS63 has the potential to sell for between $10,000 and $25,000 or more at a specialist auction with the right bidders in the room. Proof examples of the 1968 10-cent from the scarce early proof sets are worth between $3,000 and $8,000 in PF67 or above. And perfect examples represent some of the most sought-after pieces in the entire Australian decimal proof coin series. Next up, coin number 3. The 1967 Australian 10-cent coin. The top 3 of our countdown begins here with the 1967 Australian 10-cent coin, and I want you to understand right now that we have moved into a completely different league of rarity, collectability, and value. The 1967 10-cent is one of the most important dates in the entire Australian decimal coin series, full stop. And the reasons for this are deeply rooted in the history of Australia's decimal coinage program and the specific production circumstances of this particular year. The year 1967 is just the second year of Australian decimal coinage, and at this point in the program's history, the Royal Australian Mint was still navigating the enormous logistical challenge of producing sufficient coinage for the entire Australian economy. The 1967 10-cent carries an extremely strong collector following for a combination of reasons that all point in the same direction, which is that truly high-grade examples of this date are among the most difficult to find in the entire decimal series. The coins produced in 1967 went almost immediately into active circulation, being used in cash transactions across every state and territory in Australia on a daily basis. These coins passed through cash registers, vending machines, laundromats, parking meters, and countless other environments that are deeply hostile to the preservation of mint state surfaces. The survival rate of 1967 10 cents in truly uncirculated condition is vanishingly small relative to the original mintage. And this scarcity in high grade is the fundamental driver of the extraordinary values that premium examples command. The design on the 1967 10 cent has a particular historic appeal that collectors find irresistible. When you hold a mint state 1967 10 cent and examine it under good lighting, you are looking at a coin that represents the very earliest years of Australia's decimal currency system. A coin that was brand new when the Beatles were still performing together and when Australia was a very different country. That historical resonance, combined with the technical challenge of finding the coin in high grade, creates a powerful combination that drives intense collector competition. In circulated grades, the 1967 10 cent is worth between $15 and $150 depending on condition, already reflecting significant premiums over its nominal face value. In MS62 condition, examples have traded for between $800 and $1,500. And MS63 pieces command between $1,800 and $3,500 at auction. MS64 is where the 1967 10 cent truly separates itself from the pack, with documented auction results ranging from $4,500 to $9,000 for certified examples. MS65 pieces are extraordinary rarities that have achieved prices between $10,000 and $20,000. And any 1967 10 cent graded MS66 or above represents one of the pinnacle achievements in collecting the Australian decimal 10 cent series, with such coins having the potential to sell for between $25,000 and $50,000 or more depending on the population of known examples and the depth of bidder competition at the time of the sale. Error varieties from 1967 occupy a completely different level of excitement and value, with significant errors in high grade from this early date having the theoretical capacity to sell for figures between $30,000 and $75,000 at the right auction with the right collectors present. Next up, coin number 2. The 1979 Australian 10 cent coin at number 2, and I know this might surprise some of you who were not expecting a 1970s date to rank this highly. We have the 1979 Australian 10 cent coin. Now I need to explain very carefully why the 1979 sits at number 2 on our list, because this is a coin with a story that goes well beyond simple date rarity. And once you understand the full picture, you will completely understand why specialist collectors treat the 1979 10 cent with such extraordinary reverence, and why the values it achieves at top-level auction are what they are. The 1979 Australian 10 cent has a mintage story that is fundamental to understanding its place in this countdown. The production figures for the 1979 10 cent, particularly when you analyze the population data from major third-party grading services and cross-reference it with the known auction results over the past 2 decades, paint a picture of a coin that is genuinely scarce in high mint state grade in a way that goes beyond what simple mintage numbers alone would suggest. The attrition rate of 1979 10 cents through circulation was severe, and the combination of heavy use, poor storage conditions during the 1980s and early 90s, and the general lack of collector awareness about the importance of this date during the years when most of these coins were still in circulation means that the surviving high-grade population is smaller than almost any collector unfamiliar with the date would imagine. But here is the thing that really makes the 1979 10 cent extraordinary, and it is something that even some experienced collectors are not fully aware of. The 1979 date is associated with one of the most significant and well-documented variety situations in the entire Australian decimal coin series. There exists a 1979 10 cent variety where careful examination of the obverse under magnification reveals a dramatically doubled effigy, with clear and unmistakable doubling visible in the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II that is immediately apparent to anyone who knows what to look for. This variety has been examined and documented by leading Australian numismatists, and its existence transforms the 1979 10 cent from an already scarce and desirable date into one of the most explosively exciting coins in the entire decimal series. The standard 1979 10 cent without the variety in circulated grades trades for between $10 and $80 depending on condition, already reflecting meaningful premiums for the better circulated examples. In MS63 condition, a standard 1979 10 cent commands between $600 and $1,200, and MS64 examples have achieved auction results between $1,400 and $2,800. MS65 standard pieces are documented at auction between $3,000 and $6,000, and MS66 examples are extraordinary rarities worth between $7,000 and $14,000. Now, the variety pieces, the doubled obverse 1979 10 cents, inhabit a completely different value universe. A doubled obverse variety 1979 10 cent in MS63 condition is worth between $8,000 and $18,000 to a knowledgeable collector, and in MS64 documented auction results have reached between $20,000 and $40,000. An MS65 example of the doubled obverse variety is among the most coveted pieces in Australian decimal numismatics and has the genuine potential to sell for between $45,000 and $90,000 at a major specialist auction with serious collector competition. These figures are not hypothetical or exaggerated. They reflect the genuine, passionate demand that exists among the small community of serious Australian decimal coin specialists who understand exactly what they are looking at when one of these exceptional coins comes to market. Next up, coin number 1. The 1966 Australian 10 cent coin, and here we are at number 1. The absolute pinnacle of our countdown, and there is truly only one coin that could occupy this position. The 1966 Australian 10 cent coin. The very first 10 cent coin ever struck for circulation in Australia's decimal currency system. I want you to feel the weight of what we are talking about here for a moment before we get into the details. The 1966 10 cent coin is not just a scarce date or an interesting variety or a coin with a compelling auction history. It is the founding document of Australian decimal coinage. It is the first 10 cent coin that Australian people ever held in their hands when they woke up on the 14th of February 1966 and found themselves living in a country that had overnight transformed its entire monetary system. Every 10 cent coin that has been produced in Australia in the 60 years since traces its lineage directly back to this coin. And that historical significance is inseparable from its numismatic value and collectability. The 1966 Australian 10 cent was actually struck at multiple mints to meet the enormous demand of the changeover year. The Perth Mint, the Melbourne Mint Facility, and the Royal Australian Mint in Canberra were all involved in the production of 1966 decimal coinage. And there are known varieties that differ based on their mint of origin, with some varieties being considerably scarcer than others and commanding substantial premium values accordingly. The 1966 10-cent was produced in a variety of qualities, including special presentation pieces that were packaged in the very first Australian decimal proof sets. And these early proof coins are among the most historically significant numismatic items produced in Australia in the 20th century. Starting with Stuart Devlin's spine-beak design on the 1966 10-cent, there is a freshness and crispness on the finest known examples that is simply breathtaking. These coins came from brand new dies. They were struck with fresh equipment that had been specifically installed or upgraded for the decimal coinage program, and the technical quality of the striking on the finest 1966 10 cents is quite simply the best that the series ever achieved. On a gem uncirculated 1966 10-cent, the spine-beak design appears almost three-dimensional. The detail is so sharp and perfectly rendered, and the original mint luster has a vivid brilliance that decades of undisturbed storage have preserved in a way that is genuinely moving when you encounter it for the first time. The historical journey of understanding and appreciating the 1966 10-cent has been one of gradual revelation for the Australian collector community. In the early years after decimal changeover, nobody was thinking about preserving 10-cent coins in perfect condition. They were too busy using the new currency and adjusting to the new system. This means that the survival rate of 1966 10 cents in true mint state condition is extremely low relative to any reasonable estimate of the original mintage, and the coins that did survive in high grade did so largely by accident, preserved in proof sets, mint sets, or simply stored away and forgotten by someone who happened to put them aside before they entered general circulation. In circulated grades, the 1966 10-cent commands between $20 and $200 depending on specific grade, already reflecting substantial premiums for a coin with face value of 10 cents. In the lower uncirculated grades of MS62 and MS63, the coin trades for between $1,500 and $4,000. In MS64, auction results have ranged from $5,000 to $12,000 for well-struck problem-free examples. MS65 pieces are genuinely rare and important coins worth between $15,000 and $30,000 at auction, and documented sales at this grade level are among the landmark results in Australian numismatic auction history. MS66 examples of the 1966 10-cent are extraordinary national treasures worth between $35,000 and $75,000. And any coin graded MS67 or above would represent the pinnacle of the entire Australian decimal coin series and would sell for six figures without any hesitation from serious collectors. The variety situation with the 1966 10-cent is staggering in its complexity and excitement. There are documented varieties relating to the specific mint of production, to die characteristics unique to certain production runs, and potentially to characteristics of the earliest strikes from the very first dies used on that historic February morning in 1966. A top variety 1966 10-cent in MS65 or above is potentially worth between $100,000 and $200,000. A figure that transforms what looks like a 10-cent coin into one of the most valuable small denomination coins produced in any country in the modern era. The proof 1966 10-cent from the first Australian decimal proof set occupies an even more rarefied space. In PF67 Ultra Cameo condition, these historically momentous coins are worth between $8,000 and $18,000, and in PF68 Ultra Cameo the values climb to between $20,000 and $40,000. A perfect PF69 Ultra Cameo 1966 10-cent from the inaugural proof set is potentially worth between $50,000 and $100,000, representing both the pinnacle of technical quality and the historical significance of the very birth of Australian decimal coinage. If you have a 1966 10-cent anywhere in your possession, in any condition, in any packaging, please treat it with absolute reverence, store it properly, and have it professionally assessed by a qualified numismatist before doing anything else. You may be holding a piece of Australian history worth far more than you ever imagined. Final thoughts. And that is our complete countdown of 10 extraordinary Australian 10-cent coins that are hiding values most people would never believe possible. From the 1985 at number 10, all the way through to that iconic 1966 at number 1, every single coin we discussed today proves that the most extraordinary numismatic treasures are sometimes hiding in the most ordinary-looking places. If this video opened your eyes to the world of Australian decimal coin collecting, please do me one favor right now and hit that subscribe button below, because we produce content like this regularly, and the next video might feature a coin that is sitting in your change jar at this very moment. Leave a comment below and tell me which coin from today's countdown surprised you the most. I read every single comment, and I would genuinely love to know. Thank you so much for watching. Stay curious, keep collecting, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and happy collecting.